Please keep eating. Very full program, so I'd like to get started. As many of you know, this meeting marks the 65th anniversary of the Arlington Committee of 100, Arlington's gathering place to question and learn about community issues. We only exist because of you, our members. In order to I'd like to give a brief tribute to our members. So, if you've been a member for fewer than 5 years, please stand up. If you've been a member years, please stand up. Between 10 and 15? 15 and 20? Anybody over 20? Everybody up. You're the reason why we keep going. It's because of your involvement and your energy, your thirst for wanting to know what's going on in Arlington. Collectively, you're the reason why Arlington isn't just the place we live, it's our home. Unfortunately, now I have to get into some business. We have to have an annual meeting, so I call this annual meeting to order. I do this so that we can introduce the Arlington Committee of 100 board members and officers for the 2019-2020 season. But before I do, I'd like to give my personal thanks to our current board members. I've leaned on you a lot as chair. So I want to extend to each and every board member and the other people and the other members of the Committee of 100, I want to give a heartfelt thank you for everything you did to support me this year. Now on to our incoming board, which looks an awful lot like our current board. Our non-officer board members are Lizette Arias and Beachside. I can never pronounce her name. Jean Broyhill, Link Cummings, Bob Garcia, Marjorie Hobart, Timon Honda, Kim Klingler, Brian Marquin, Chuck Morley, and Scott Pedowitz. Would you all please stand up? And now for our officers, treasurer will be Anita Nolan, secretary will be Hannah Dannenfelser, vice chair will be Shannon Dorsey, and chair will be Lynn Jewell. Would you please stand up? Do I hear a nomination for these new board members and officers? Second, okay. All in favor? All opposed? I hereby name you to your positions in the 2019-2020 Arlington Committee of 100 positions. Congratulations. I'd like now, finally, to bring this meeting to a close. So moved. Okay, do I hear a second to close the meeting? All in favor? All opposed? Okay, meeting adjourned. As we commemorate our 65th anniversary, it's only fitting that the Arlington Committee of 100, built on community service and engagement. Where is it? Oh, okay. Oh. Sorry, tech problems. It's only fitting that we commemorate community service and engagement. Like everything else, it's changed through the years. There was a time you could cold call people, they would answer the phone, and you could get them involved in your movement. Nothing in that sentence is true anymore. But what does remain true is the goal to better our community. The intent of our community leaders hasn't changed, but how they do it has. It's critical we understand how people interact because the goals of community service and altruism haven't changed that much, but the way we do it has changed profoundly. I don't need to tell you the challenges in bringing Arlington together. The telltale signs are everywhere. But we are not the first people to face them, and we've convened 3 tireless servants to Arlington to speak to how we can come together, how they see things, and pretty much anything they want to talk about, because as we see it, they deserve to have their say. John Milliken is the chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Virginia Port Authority and has served in that position under 5 Virginia governors. Prior to his service on the Port Board, he served in a number of transportation-related positions in the state and local government, including Commonwealth Secretary of Transportation, chairman of the board of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, elected member of the chairman of the Arlington County Board, was a member of the Transportation Planning Board of the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments, a graduate of Haverford College and the University of Virginia School of Law. He practiced infrastructure law in the Washington area until his retirement from Venable LLP in 2015. He currently serves as a senior fellow in residence at the Sharp School of Policy at George Mason University in Arlington. Ladies and gentlemen, John Milliken. Why don't you just use the mic here? Okay. Yeah, I think it'd be easier.
Thank you. I have to say how delighted I am to be back before the Committee of 100. I started thinking about when I first spoke here, and I think my first presentation of the Committee of 100 was 1979. So, and I've been a member of and been back as a speaker for this group a number of times. Part of my task tonight, I think, and I infer this myself, I wasn't given it, but part of it is to be the historian, to say kind of how things came to be what they are. So my thesis, and we'll test it tonight, is the more things change, and Arlington has changed dramatically in the 60 years that I've been here, the more they stay the same. The fundamentals stay the same. The focus changes, what people are concerned about, how they express that concern, how they go about it has changed dramatically. But the fundamentals of Arlington are really not much different now than they were when the Committee of 100 was founded. So I'm going to test that thesis tonight and ask you to critique it if you wish. I have no idea how I changed the slides. Oh, that's all right. So a little bit of a history lesson. Population in Arlington, it was the New Deal, it was the outset of World War II, and the population in Arlington changed dramatically. We were a farming community, like most communities were, but the influx of new residents during the decade of the 40s and then into the 50s were people who came from elsewhere, wherever the elsewhere was at that time. It was probably Indiana or Pennsylvania or maybe South Carolina. That was the elsewhere in those days. Live births at Arlington Hospital skyrocketed because these were all people in their childbearing, child-rearing period of their lives. In 1940, the population, 57,000. In 1950, more than double that, 135,000. And just to give you some context to it, 1960, it had only gone up again maybe another 35,000 to 160 or so. 1970, it had only gone up to 174. So that decade only saw 10,000 net new residents. 1980, it had gone down. The big population boom in Arlington, the first boom, we've had an echo boom these last 20 years, but the first boom of population came in the 40s and 50s. Now let's see if I can do this on my own. Apparently not. All right, thank you. So, what were all these new young people concerned about? They were concerned principally about the schools. That was what drove the interest in the 1940s and into the 50s, because they were at that age and that stage in life. And something called the Citizens Committee for School Improvement was founded in 1947. And of all things, they convinced the state legislature to allow Arlington, and only Arlington, of all the jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, only Arlington was allowed to have an elected school board. Because Arlington was, to the rest of Virginia, that place up there. You know, they want to do that, fine, go ahead. We don't mind. But what happened then came in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education. And it was in that context that the Committee of 100 was founded, to deal with the emotions and the difficulties that that era brought. The conflict levels had risen dramatically between the old guard and the new guys. And Committee of 100 was founded to, quote, counteract the polarization that developed in the civic life after World War II. It was the newcomers versus the old-timers. It was a group of people who were civically active and concerned versus the more established business and professional community that had been in Arlington a long time. And post-1954, it was increasingly a division over the future of the schools. The Good Schools movement had been a reflection of the boom in the school system that had occurred from all of those live births that happened in Arlington Hospital. The activists needed an outlet for their intellectual and political energies, and they found it in the schools. Nobody cared about what the county board was doing. The focus was on the schools. And in January of 1956, partly in reaction to the state's reaction to what was happening in education and Brown v. Board, the school board voted to put a large bond issue on the ballot for new elementary schools and to desegregate the Arlington schools. Well, not surprisingly, the legislature immediately took away the power to have an elected school board. And that led to the founding of the Arlington Committee to Preserve Public Schools, which, because the school board was no longer an elected post, all of a sudden they became more interested in what the county board was doing because it had the budget. And that led to the founding of Arlingtonians for a Better County, and a political group that drove Arlington politics for the next 30 years. So the fundamentals remain the same. And here's the heart of my thesis. What are the fundamentals of Arlington politics that drive our involvement? Most people who live and are active in Arlington are very comfortable with government. They don't mind being involved. They either work for government, they work around government, they've got a spouse that works for government. They're not afraid of it. They understand what government's function is, and they want to be involved. It isn't the enemy. Government is them. They're highly educated. They have resources of time and money. We were then and are now a relatively affluent area, and we're relatively small and more or less homogeneous, and we have an electoral system in the county board system of government that is built for incremental change. We have one county board seat every year, and so by definition, the change is going to be incremental. It takes you 4 years if you want to turn all the rascals out. You can't do it all at once like every other jurisdiction in Virginia is able to do and does periodically throw out the entire governing body. By definition, ours is an incremental system. So the methods change, how we communicate between citizen and government and among citizens obviously changes. It's easier to communicate, but because it's gotten so easy, messages get lost in the clutter of messages that we all get. The burden still rests, as it always has, on the citizen to cut through that clutter. Insta this and snap that and stuff that I don't really understand. All of those things are available and usable, but sorting through the proliferation of messages that we all get is one of the challenges that we face. And one of the ways of doing that is to utilize organizations like this one that regularly get together and talk with each other. We're not snapping or Facebooking or something alone. We're actually having conversations with each other. And for that, the Committee of 100 and organizations like it continue to play a critical role. The fundamentals don't change. The superficial stuff does, the focus may, but the fundamentals of Arlington participation haven't changed. With that, I'll turn this over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Krista Jones. In 2006, Krista founded Vote Lead Impact to increase the number of black elected officials. She was formerly director of outreach for Congressman Moran and Congressman Beyer, and a past chair of the Commission of the Status of Women. She currently serves on the board of the Arlington Community Foundation and the Junior League of Northern Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, Krista Jones.
So before I talk about my perspective on where Arlington is going, I wanted to talk a little bit about me and also my thoughts about where Arlington has been. I moved here from Florida shortly after graduating from college and went off to the Peace Corps because I wanted to save the world, and then came back to the DC area and finally moved to Arlington in 2004. It has always been really important to me to focus on community engagement and community leadership and try to create the next generation of leaders. And so that's where my comments are really coming from today. I've always been inspired and interested in how we can solve critical problems by trying to determine whether it's developing more resources for leaders, whether it's training, whether it's networks. When I look at Arlington, I see a number of progressive firsts. From the Freedmen's Village, obviously everyone knows that during Reconstruction, African Americans settled several communities after being involved in the Freedmen's Village, and some of those communities still exist today. And a lot of those African Americans have gone on to do great things. Those families, some are actually in this room. In 1959, as John was really leading up to, we were the first to integrate schools. Throughout the years, even though today we're seeing a huge increase in women running for office and getting involved in politics, Having women engaged in politics is nothing new to Arlington. If you go back to the list of the county board, we've had women involved for decades. And then, of course, we've done a number of other firsts, like Metro, like being really the first to really think about how Metro could impact the region and our community and the way we live, and we still feel that today. But if you peel the layer back from the progressiveness of Arlington, there are some things you'll find that you may not want to see. As we, I'm sure, have heard that, unfortunately, we had a wall in Halls Hill segregating the black and white neighborhoods up to 1966. And then if you even look now, even though we're doing a pretty good job on ameliorating the north-south divide in Arlington, there's still research that shows that where children are born in Arlington can have a decades-long ripple effect on their futures, with kids in the county's more ethnically diverse neighborhoods growing up to make less money and end up in jail at higher rates than their counterparts. And this is often irrespective of race. So we definitely have a challenge there. So what is next for Arlington? I don't think you can have this conversation without talking about Amazon and what those effects will have on our community. While Amazon is bringing jobs, bringing resources, bringing new people who have a lot to give the community, we're also going to struggle with affordable housing issues, which we've struggled with for years. And the county board and other organizations are looking at policies that we can implement to try to help some of those issues. So everything from changing zoning ordinances in terms of single-family homes and accessory dwelling units. You also have to look at transportation. So throughout the years, as I mentioned earlier, Metro has been a huge part of our community. But today, those challenges are changing, and in the future, they're changing. So it's not just Metro, it's now scooters and driverless vehicles, and how are we managing bicycles and pedestrians? So all of those things are going to be a part of the conversation about how we move forward. And then today, it's so apropos that we're having this conversation the day after a primary election, because Arlington politics are definitely changing. So no matter how you feel about national money being involved in local races, I think we have to realize that this will probably not be the last race where that happened. So we as a community have to figure out how we feel about that and move forward. And lastly, I would say something that we really want to think about is inclusivity. So I have to say, I moved to Arlington in 2004, not necessarily because I intentionally sought out Arlington, but my real estate agent found an affordable unit along Columbia Pike. She said this area is going through a revitalization. They're going to have a streetcar. There's all this flavor to the area. Well, that was 2004, and it is 2019. There is no streetcar, but I really do love Arlington. And one of the things, when you talk about Arlington, you always inevitably hear people talk about the Arlington way. And to me, that means more than just our method, sometimes prolonged, of citizen engagement and making sure everyone is involved, really alluding to a lot of the points that John was making about what it is about Arlington communities and how we interact. But it's also about the idea that everybody can be involved. I know for me, when I came, I was just so astounded to be able to call Chris Zimmerman or email him and want to talk about transportation, and I'm allowed to sit in the chair of the county board's office. He didn't know me from anybody to talk about transportation. So I think that inclusivity and involvement is key to moving forward to address a lot of these challenges. I have been involved in a lot of leadership development organizations. As was mentioned, I founded an organization called VLI, which trains African Americans to run for office. And that has been really critical in shaping my perspective in terms of inclusivity and making sure everyone is at the table. I also am really involved in the Junior League, and I want to mention the Junior League in particular because it originally started out as the Service League of Arlington in 1958. I would not have been able to join the Junior League in 1958, 1968, or even 1978. And today, it has grown to be an excellent organization, despite the stereotypes of one which trains women to be civic leaders. And I think organizations like the Junior League, like Leadership Center for Excellence, are so important as we move forward to find people to solve these problems of the future. And lastly, I want to mention the Arlington Community Foundation. The Arlington Community Foundation was founded by Judge Bill Newman a few decades ago, and today is doing excellent work to confront and really take a close look at some of the issues we're facing. We recently convened Shared Prosperity Initiative, which is funded by national foundations, to bring together businesses, community leaders, government leaders, to talk about just how we make sure that everyone is inclusive, how we make sure that everyone gets a fair shake in Arlington. So as we end, I just want to say that, for my vision for Arlington, it really is making sure that we keep the Arlington way, even though in a new form, so we can adequately solve a lot of the challenges of the future. Thank you.
Okay, our last speaker will be Hannah Dannenfelser. Hannah was born and raised an Arlingtonian and is the product of Arlington Public Schools. She's actively engaged in the Arlington Committee as a board member of the Arlington Committee of 100, an active alumni in the Leadership Center of Excellence for Excellence's Young Professionals Program, a volunteer ambassador for the Arlington Chamber, and a member of the Chamber's Community Action Committee. She serves on volunteer Arlington's Young Professionals Advisory Council and on the Community Progress Network. Her career supports her being actively engaged in the community and as the Community Involvement Ambassador at Arlington Community Federal Credit Union, and previously in her role at the Arlington Chamber of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Hannah Dannenfelser.
So Timon and I were joking a little bit about that, the one, the only, earlier, because I'm actually, as far as I know, I'm actually literally the only Hannah Dannenfelser, which sounds fun, but it also means if you find anything about me on the internet, I can't really hide. It's probably me. So let me just make sure I got this. All right, well, first, I just want to say thank you to the Committee of 100 for inviting me to speak on the young professionals' perspective on community engagement in Arlington. This is actually my first panel speaking opportunity, and I'm really humbled that I get to follow John and Krista, who are really community icons. They've been transformational leaders in Arlington, and they really set the standard for people in my generation and the generations that follow to really find ways to serve in Arlington. I suspect that we're going to spend the bulk of the question and answer period on discussing the future of Arlington. So I heard a comment about Amazon. I'm sure we'll get to that. So right now I'm going to share some of my personal experiences and observations on how and why young professionals choose to start finding ways to be involved through volunteering, local government processes, local political processes, and more. So I was born in Arlington Hospital before it was Virginia Hospital Center, and I was a student in Arlington Public Schools. I've been here for my whole life, with the exception of going away to college, and this community has changed significantly over that time. The truth is, I did not grow up realizing that Arlington was turning into such a destination-worthy hub. I thought it was just an average community to grow up in. As I've gotten to know people from around the country and around the world, I've realized that it's actually really unique to call this home. My involvement in Arlington as an adult has been a snowball effect, as I think it has been for many others. It started by finding and joining the Arlington JC's board, which led to a job at the Arlington Chamber. And my role at the Chamber led to a job in community outreach at the Arlington Community Federal Credit Union. Through my community outreach work, I've had the opportunity to be even more deeply involved in Arlington, both personally and professionally. A consistent theme has been a lot of chance encounters and small moments that turned into major life directions and new opportunities to being involved in various aspects of Arlington's business and civic communities. Arlington creates an ecosystem that not only supports economic growth, but also deep civic engagement through volunteerism, civic organizations, government engagement processes, political life, and more. For the young professionals who are new to this community, it can be an overwhelming prospect to navigate a new home. In terms of who they are, they have high salaries and competitive careers. They tend to live along the metro corridors and often with roommates, and their 2-bedroom apartments go for about $2,500 a month. They are highly educated and come from all over the country and all around the world. They often arrive in Arlington as government contractors or working in the political scene. But as our economy is diversified, some of them are part of private industry, especially in the startups and the tech field. So young professionals here can be hard to engage for a few reasons. In terms of getting involved, they have demanding jobs and commitments that really limit their free time. They aren't necessarily planning to stay here, so they're less compelled to get started in setting down roots in Arlington. It's no surprise to anyone in here today that many of them don't think they can afford to. Also, they aren't particularly aware of the challenges that this community faces. They don't know that despite a privileged experience that so many of us have, that there's a 10-year discrepancy in life expectancy depending on what neighborhood you live in Arlington. They aren't aware that in our public schools, 30% of students are on free and reduced lunch due to financial need. But Tuckahoe Elementary has 0.5% of those students, and Carlin Springs Elementary has 80%. They haven't heard that the Arlington Food Assistance Center serves 2,300 needy families every week. Many of them aren't aware that underneath the high-paying jobs, the bar scene, and the glitzy apartment complexes, there are some profound inequities and needs. Some young professionals are proactively looking for opportunities to be involved in the community by seeking out resources like Volunteer Arlington. But what I tend to hear more about is their organic connections that come to them through their natural day-to-day. It's a booth at a community event, a friend inviting them to a service activity or a fundraiser, an issue hitting the news cycle that prompts them to seek a resource, or their company forming a community partnership that puts an opportunity on their radar. So for folks looking to start engaging young professionals, I think there's a couple places to start the conversation. Number one is volunteer management. Efficient and effective volunteer management models are really key. With limited time to offer, volunteer managers, civic leaders, local government officials, they need to be hyper-focused on how to maximize time and impact. It's about making the most of volunteer time, but it's also crucial to make the connection that shows how their time has translated into significant and clear impact. They may not have large amounts of time to commit, but they want to see that they're making a difference. Number two, finding venues for education on community needs. Meeting young professionals where they already are in their day-to-day and making sure that they understand the problems that need to be solved. That's likely going to be through social media and digital marketing methods. Number three, creating moments of connection. How do you reach young professionals in their natural day-to-day? The clear place to start the conversation in my mind is where do they live, work, and play? So young professionals, that's typically apartments, employers, and their social lives. I would say employers really tops that list. It's one of the reasons why corporate partnerships between nonprofits and businesses are so crucial. They build pipelines for employees to become volunteers and often donors. But for finding connection opportunities, there's 3 other categories to think about and access points to engaging young professionals, and I think they're slam dunks. A little closer, thank you. So forgive me, I'm gonna use some really corny alliteration here, but reaching them through their politics, preaching, and pets. In this area, young professionals seek out and form community around their political leanings, their churches or spiritual networks, and of course, a complete and total obsession with their animals. As to the most important part of engaging young professionals, after you've designed efficient opportunities, educated them on community needs, and created moments of connection, it's to cultivate a culture of connectedness. For those who are seeking a network, a passion, an outlet, or a new personal or professional growth opportunity, help facilitate social opportunities and help create a community of support around them. With almost 230,000 residents, It's easy to get lost in the shuffle. It's easy to feel anonymous. It's easy to feel isolated. So it can be really lonely to be a young person here. If you can create opportunities for people to connect with others over shared passions, interests, and mission, you're going beyond a volunteer event, a community forum, an educational program. And you're creating an ecosystem that helps build belonging, camaraderie, and a shared commitment to building Arlington into a better place. Making sure that young professionals are welcomed, supported, and connected with new people is the key to transitioning someone from a passive resident to someone who wants to be part of the fabric and next generation of leadership in this community. So where was my start? The first moment for me started on the path to many different ways to be part of Arlington life was in Clarendon Day in 2014 when I was walking through with a beer in my hand. I had the vague desire to find ways to commit my time to make this community a better place. I didn't know how to start or who my resources would be. It took Paul and Jennifer catching my eye as I was walking through the festival. They told me about ways to not only volunteer with local causes and get involved through the Arlington JCs, but also to build long-term relationships and friendships within the organization. I've since moved on from the Arlington JCs, but that single moment opened up doors to opportunities through the Arlington Chamber, the Leadership Center, my current job at the Arlington Community Federal Credit Union, opportunities to engage with Arlington Economic Development, Volunteer Arlington, numerous nonprofits, a local political campaign, and the Arlington Committee of 100. I want to be part of the fabric and next generation of leadership in the community. So those brief moments, they really, really matter. And those people who became my network, my friends, my advocates, and my cheerleaders have led to many more relationships and many more moments that have led to me giving back to Arlington in my own small way. And moments like that are how you engage my peers. Thanks.
Okay, now I'd like to invite our three speakers up to the table in the front. And while they come up, are there any elected officials to recognize? Oh, Matt DeFronte, please stand up. Anybody else? Matt, did you give everybody your work? Is that why they're not here? I'm sorry, who's here? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, who is it? Oh, Emma Viola Sands. Please stand up. Okay, now it's time for Q&A. Do we have the microphones ready? Okay, Lynn has the microphone, so who'd like to ask the first question? Emma.
Yes, I have been in Arlington since 1976, and my work has been mostly with immigrants and refugees, you know, Arlington Public Schools, and now with the nonprofit, the Dream Project. But I think that Hannah mentioned the fact that, you know, I know John Milliken, you did tell us about the fundamentals, but the fundamentals of engagement also include inclusivity. And I think Arlington, for all these years, more than 40 years, and I have been the Hannahs of the world and that have been in the Committee of 100, my resume tells all of the organizations. It is very difficult to come in as a newcomer, especially if you may be non-English speaker or if you would be low income. So it's difficult to be at the table. And so how do you foresee, or what strategies do you suggest for what I would call mainstream organizations that all of you are part of, that they need to do to include more people?
That's an excellent question. And I'll just use the Junior League as an example, especially because that's an organization that has been traditionally very white. They have a huge diversity and inclusion initiative, so that is something that all of the leagues are trying to do. But it's not only about reaching out to certain minority groups, which is a good start, but it's changing the fabric of the organization, the actual culture of the organization. So it's changing our bylaws, changing our procedures, so we think differently about diversity, inclusion, and equity. So that's just one thing. But
good to see you, Emma. Thanks for the question. I would say in terms of reaching the young professional group, I would say it's a challenge, but starting with the community events that are going on in Arlington where you know young professionals are going to be, I think that's a really good start to reach people. If you aren't already, if your organization or other organizations like it are not already partners with organizations like Volunteer Arlington, I think that's a really good place to start. Social media is I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion at this point to start with social media. But I think it's also about using your existing network of people and using them as ambassadors for your organization. I know you work with a lot of young people with the Dream Project, and many organizations here, many organizations are working with young people as well. And it's about getting those people to be ambassadors to their friends. I was reading the Case Foundation is a great group that does a lot of research around millennial engagement. And one of the things they've done some studies on, and it's a little intuitive, but they've got some great data around it, is that people are much more likely to, or millennials specifically, are much more likely to donate, to volunteer, to get involved if their supervisor, their coworker, their friend is getting involved. So if you can use those people who are already a part of your organization and figure out how they're your best ambassadors to the other communities they're a part of, I think that's a really important starting point.
I'll just add one quick thing, and that is to say, one, it takes effort. You can't be passive about it. You have to go where the various communities are physically and culturally, whether it's sports organizations or social clubs or restaurants, places where they feel comfortable, and find them and identify them and reach out to them there. Simply kind of passively inviting them to be a part of whatever your group is, not going to do it. You've got to go and build some trusting relationships, and that only happens if you are where they are.
Okay, I believe we have a question over here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Brian Marroquin. I'm part of the Committee of 100 board, actually. And I've been a member since 2009, actually since graduating college. So I actually wanted to, Hannah, thank you for your comment about sort of growing up and sometimes not recognizing, so I grew up in Arlington, not recognizing the kind of how I think exceptional, this community is in many ways. And for that, it didn't really come to a head until I got involved more as an adult. But my question, kind of around this topic, has to do with, I think we all feel, positively about this community, whether you grew up here or you came here as an adult. And I think one of the challenges of that is that there can be a lot of sort of complacency about some of the issues. So my question is, briefly stated, is how do we move from good enough to good for everyone? One of the narratives of this election that just ended really quickly is that, things seem to be good enough, for some that were looking at the candidates, so why make a change? Whereas, others were saying, well, there's these other issues that maybe don't affect you directly, depending on your life situation, so, but that doesn't mean they're not there. How do we go from good enough to good for all?
I think you stumped them.
I'll start with that. First of all, I think the community needs to recognize that good enough ain't enough, and that we can do better. There's no earthly excuse for Arlington to have an elementary school where 80% of the kids are on free and reduced lunch. That's unfortunately a commentary about our housing patterns and our inability to integrate successive communities into the mainstream of Arlington. And yes, we're rightly proud of a lot of the things that we have done, but in a community that has an elementary school like that has the affordable housing issues that we face, we're not doing enough. So first is recognition, resources, and perseverance are the three things that it's going to take.
You know, I'm working for my third elected official now, and something I've noticed across the board is it's the same people who call in to their elected officials and are concerned about issues. And I think if the people who really wanted that change really felt that those people who don't think that it is good enough, if they were more vocal, I think that would change a lot. And it really goes back to Emma's question too. I mean, it's part of it is reaching out to them and trying to make sure they're engaged. And that's everyone's responsibility. It's not only the organizations, but I personally feel it's government's responsibility as well. I mean, I know I do work for the county board, and I take that as one of my responsibilities, is trying to make sure that if we're doing an outreach event, that we need to make sure a range of people are represented. So it's really a community responsibility to make that happen and to facilitate that.
And I'll say John and Krista have some really great comments from a systemic level, and definitely agree with those. But I would just add that on an individual level, some friends of mine and I, we were having this similar conversation recently around how do you start the conversations with people that maybe have a lack of they're coming from a perspective of a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge, and how you start those individual level conversations, and coming at them from a place of seeking first to understand and then being understood was a really big theme that we came from, and understanding why people don't understand talking to people about what their knowledge gaps are and how you can come in and have a discussion with them to educate them and encourage them to be part of solutions after. So I think the individual conversations, especially the folks, as you're talking about people who are unengaged, I think sharing your passion for engagement with people on an individual level is really helpful.
Next question, over here, right in the middle.
I'm Chris Gregory. Hannah, if I were to go to a dog park and I wanted to get some young people to get involved, would they be more likely to be interested in the Arlington Committee of 100, or would they be more interested in some sort of thing like filling backpacks with school supplies before the school starts in September?
That's a great question, and I think on the board of the Committee of 100, we have a conversation about how do we make the Committee of 100 really attractive to young professionals. So I think that's a little bit of what your question is getting at in terms of attracting the Committee of 100 or attracting them to a donation bin. I would say if you're trying to go through the angle of getting people through their pets, I actually think the strongest route to go is through the Animal Welfare League of Arlington. They have a really strong volunteer base among young professionals, and they're just a really active organization overall. They do events. I think just networking within those circles is really effective. Does that get at the question? Or I want to make sure I understand. Is that getting at the question that you're asking? Sorry, Lynn, thanks.
Oh, I think there's a follow-up.
When you look here, you know
No, please use the microphone.
So more about Committee 100. Okay, so wow, there's been so many conversations. So what I will say is that we have a work group that we're putting together this summer that is especially around a conversation around how do we attract a lot of different people, including young professionals. How do we encourage young professionals to see this as an area, when I talked about areas of connectedness, creating connectedness, how do we make sure we're creating connectedness for young professionals? I think I think there's a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of ideas in the air, so I don't want to get too specific just because there's such an array. But I think the question we're trying to answer is how do we provide both information and create connectedness in a way that reaches young professionals that's different from where they already get their information? What is different than reading Arl Now? What is different than following the Facebook or Twitter feed of different nonprofits in Arlington or the Arlington County government? So what is the unique value proposition that we have? And I think that creating that community of connectedness is a really important part of it.
If I could just add a recommendation, I think that if you partner with other organizations, particularly when you're trying to reach out to minority groups, that might be helpful. Like maybe do a program that might be of interest to one of those groups, or have someone from that community on the panel and get them to come to the event and learn more about the committee.
I'm the last person up here who ought to be responding to the question of what would a millennial like. But my strong reaction is that something that is tangible, active, is much more likely to attract their attention initially than a group of people that meets for dinner once a month. And it's only once you've got them engaged in something to see the value of what that something is, whether it's filling backpacks for school kids or doing something at AFAC or volunteering at a hospice or whatever it may be, something active, that then the more intellectual and philosophical part that gets built into discussions at groups like this will be of interest to them.
Next question is going to Scott Pedowitz.
Thank you. I'm Scott Pedowitz. I'm one of those people who sends Krista a lot of emails. It's very, I think we talked a lot about, you get involved, we all have limited amounts of time, you find something you like, you find a group of friends, you love it, it's your entry into the community. But there's that risk that if it becomes your defining element, while you're having a great time, you're making great connections, you can become closed into that it becomes your circle, and you become siloed off and insular from everybody else. And I've seen a lot of instances, I don't think this is unique to Arlington, where folks who are not terribly far apart feel massively far apart because they're not interlocking. From your experiences, what are ways to help kind of break those out and permeate a bit so that people can realize, hey, we're 90% overlapped, or we share this common interest, and let's work together on the things that we can and maybe learn new places to be?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you specifically referring to the political groups, or are you more broadly than that?
Not necessarily. Even community groups where, this is what I do, I have fun, but it becomes my network, and there are other things that could be of interest. Certainly it applies to politics, but not uniquely so.
I'm a big fan of coalitions. So, I've worked a lot with just trying to get groups that would normally not work together but do have things in common to try to work together. So I've done it a lot around women's groups. So I think that's a key thing. And you start to realize how much, first of all, your calendars are conflicting with each other, so you can't even attend another organization events. And then also just how much you have in common. So I brought together a group of women and found that they all wanted to learn about fund development. So that was a natural way to just sit down and say, hey, let's all learn about this, and we would learn from each other. But I also think, I think coalitions and partnerships, that's what I've kind of leaned towards to do that. And almost like Hannah said earlier, like having ambassadors, but why not have ambassadors to different organizations? Like, why not talk to the Black sororities about each having an ambassador to the Committee of 100, because they all have social action committees and political action committees. So this will be a natural fit. So maybe they could put it into their rules or annual calendar that they're going to go to at least one Committee of 100 meeting a year.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one in
Seconded.
front. Oops, I'm sorry. We have a question up front. And I think we're running short on time, so you might be having the last question.
I'm wondering about what each of you think about the role of churches in Arlington.
They are important social and community institutions and have been in Arlington for as long as Arlington and its churches have been here. I happened just this weekend to be involved in an anniversary celebration for Culpeper Garden. Culpeper Garden was created by a group of people in one of Arlington's churches, Unitarian Church, as an outgrowth of their religious mission. There are any number of institutions in Arlington that are the outgrowth of church involvement in the community. So I think they're a very important institution in Arlington and as they are elsewhere.
I totally agree. I mean, definitely in the Black community, for example, extremely important to how we organize, not around a lot of social action type initiatives. So I think they're really, really important.
Yeah, I think the church communities in Arlington serve a lot of roles. I think one of the most important is creating a network and creating that community between those people, certainly the spiritual aspect, but I think those community pieces are really important. We have a lot of people, and I'm going to speak towards the young professional piece of it, are coming from all parts of the country, coming from churches in their own towns, oftentimes much smaller areas, much smaller towns than what we live in here, and the natural instinct is to go to the community. What is the comparable organization that is the community that they came from previously to this? I think they're really important. I also think when we talk about a culture of philanthropy, volunteerism, creating coalitions, it's really important. I think one of my favorite examples is Offender Aid and Restoration, which works with people coming out of incarceration. And they, in particular, have a really heavy concentration of within the religious community. I've just noticed, not that they're not in other nonprofits in Arlington as well, but especially concentrated in OAR. And I think it's really about that community, those religious communities create radical empathy. And the mission of OAR really requires radical empathy. These are people who have made a mistake, as we all have. And it's easy to turn those people away in our minds and not think about them anymore. So these ideas of radical empathy that the church communities create really help breed a lot of this desire to serve and desire to give back. So I think it's really important.
Okay, well, we're coming to the close of our program. Thank you to our speakers. You've given us a lot to think about, aspire to, and live up to. But you have inspired us to redouble our efforts to improve our community, so please join me in giving them a round of applause. You can come on. You can come on down. Let me, if you indulge me for one moment. Oops. Just one moment, please. Okay. My thanks go out to the program committee, especially Scott Pedowitz, for setting up tonight's program. Thank you again to Joy Coleman of Marymount and the Marymount staff for another great evening. Thank you to Anita Nolan and Marjorie Hobart for working the front desk. And of course to George Hobart for selling the all-important drink tickets. Now, on a personal note, this is my last evening as chairing this committee. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your trust. And now you might not be so happy that I was chairing. I realize now that I should have realized that chairing the Arlington Committee of 100 was coming, but hey, silly me, I never saw the signs that I was going to be doing it until recently. Now, for those of you who don't know, I first came here in 2012. I came here by myself. I was solicited from the Arlington County Fair, and I figured it'd be I thought I'd come to a room where I knew nobody, and I was wrong, because I met Lynn Jewell. And for those who don't know, Lynn Jewell, okay, I know Lynn Jewell because when I went to Kenmore in 1978-9 as a 7th grader, and that's me at age 11 in 7th grade, Mr. Jewell was my math teacher. Or maybe that's John Denver. We never did get that settled. Now, Lynn, don't feel bad about this photo 41 years ago. I'm the one who gained 75 pounds since this picture was taken. Okay? Lynn, as long as I've got your attention, I just wanted to let you know that I don't remember a thing from 7th grade math. Somehow I got into algebra the next year anyway, and I'm sure you're wondering if you can change my grade now. Now, prior to Kenmore, I attended Drew Model School for 1st grade. I was there in the same class as Peter Hunter. Now, if that name rings a bell, it's because he's the son of Jim Hunter, who many of you may know because he had a dog park named after him, but prior to that, he was a county board member and did just about everything one could do in Arlington. And Marjorie's exactly right. He was also, most importantly, former chair of the Arlington Committee of 100. Now, Peter talked me into being on his soccer team, and so here's a photo of the Hunter clan as it stood at the time, circa 1977. So that's Jim and his wife Patty in the back row, and his children Jessica. Peter, who is, although he's I think 2 years younger than Jamie, was actually taller than him. And by the way, we were really bad. In 2 seasons, we won 2 games. Okay. Now, before that, I went to Syfax Elementary School, which was run by Evelyn Syfax. And you may know that Evelyn Syfax was a teacher in Arlington County Public Schools. She later went on to serve on the school board and was instrumental in integrating the schools here. Now, I bring this up because her son Craig is one of the technicians for Arlington Independent Media. And Craig, while I have the stage, I'd just like to thank you and for everything that your mom did for our community in general and for me personally. So thank you very much. And here's a picture of Craig, I'm sorry. Now, I should note that one thing that I learned either from your mom or Mrs. Green was how to fold a paper bag. Now, that seems pretty trite now, but in 1972, that was a nice skill to have because all you got were paper bags from the grocery stores, from the Grand Union and A&Ps and so forth. That's a skill that I found useful then and a little bit now. And I have to ask, Lynn, why didn't you teach us something useful like that in 7th grade?
Well, that was after you didn't turn in your homework enough. I'm still waiting.
You know, you're trying to train. I can see you trying to change my grade. Okay. So anyway, I'm coming to the end. I just wanted to say that I want to thank everybody for their indulgence. That as you see these dots lined up, that no, I don't see how it led to this. But I tell myself that anyway to make myself feel good and feel like this had a purpose. But really, it was a pleasure to serve all of you. Thank you so much for giving me the honor. And with that, I get to tell you to please turn in your name cards at the end of the evening. And we look forward to seeing you in September. Thank you very much.